Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today we're joined by Tom Dawkins. He is from Start Some Good, CEO and co-founder. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Cheers, Tom. So who is Tom? Tell us a bit about who you are, your background, your history, Tom.
Those are big questions, Andrew. So I guess I'm someone who is very passionate about making a difference and kind of from a fairly early age have been a very, mission-driven, you might say, in terms of wanting to kind of orienting my life around the kind of social impact I want to have. But one of the things that I guess I got very passionate about very early, which perhaps is a bit unusual, is it's not just that I'm kind of, political or a change maker or the specific things I want to change. I'm actually interested in the whole ecosystem of how change happens. And the particular thing that I care deeply about and have really spent the majority of my career working on is trying to make it easier for people to make a difference. How do we remove some of the barriers for people? And it's, similar to what you guys are doing. When someone has a great idea in their head and they want to get it out there in the real world, that's what we want to do, but not just for kind of technical ideas, but for anyone who has an idea for how something could be better, for something that would improve their community. We want to make it just a little bit easy. It's never easy to change the world. That's hard. So I'm not pretending that we don't make it easy, but we aspire to make it easier by providing tools and coaching. And that really rests on, I guess, my whole life purpose is to try and build a kind of a better democracy. And to me, that means one where people can participate in making things happen. It's not just about voting. I think voting is to democracy like AGMs are to a business.
Good point.
Like big companies have to have an AGM and they're an important administrative mechanism, but no one would claim that the heart of business activity is an AGM. And I think in the same way, the heart of democracy is not an election. It's every other day of the year. How we participate, how we make a difference, how we create the future that we want. And so that's taken me through founding 3 not-for-profits and a couple of social enterprises, all focused on helping people get active and make a difference. But Start Some Good is certainly the most technology.
So in terms of where do you think you got that passion from? Where did that stem from, Tom? Like, if you think back, what do you reckon that was? Where did that come from? Because
I actually have a specific experience I can point to. And I think, possibly I would have got there anyway through a different series of circumstances. But certainly I didn't, as a teenager, have any sense of what I wanted to be when I grew up. I hadn't discovered that sense of purpose. I no longer had kind of a thing I wanted to be when I grew up. I no longer wanted to be a fireman, but I didn't know what I did want to be.
Does anyone know what they want to be at 16?
No, some people pretend.
Yeah.
Today, you shouldn't know what you want to be because the thing you want to be probably doesn't exist yet. And that's how it turned out for me. I couldn't have known what I wanted to be because how could I have been like, when I grow up, I want to be a crowdfunding entrepreneur. Like, I don't understand what any of those words mean. But the particular experience I did have, so I was really struggling in high school, to be honest, doing really badly at school and getting in fights and being bullied and having a bad time. And I got kicked out of class in year 10, English class specifically, for speaking and being disruptive. And this used to happen to me a little bit. And I was there in the corridor reflecting on the injustice of the world and feeling sorry for myself. And I found a brochure that someone had dropped in the corridor. It literally had like muddy footprints on top of it. And it was a brochure for a student exchange program. And I didn't know that existed. No one had introduced me to the concept of student exchanges, that it was possible as a high school student to get the hell out for a little while and go somewhere else. So I went home that night and announced to my parents, Mum and Dad, I'm going to go to America for a year. And they, in retrospect, they were slightly suspiciously, in retrospect, really enthusiastic about that. They were like,
or to get you out of there.
Yeah, and so it took about a year before I went, but I found myself a year later in a little, well, not that little, kind of 300,000 people, a small city called Spokane, Washington. And so that would have been a life-changing experience on its own. But then an even more random thing, if that wasn't kind of random and coincidental enough, out of class, finding the brochure, been lucky enough to, of course, have parents who could support me to pursue that dream. I then was selected to attend a conference, essentially, called the State of the World Forum, which was this big powwow of all these important people, like 7 Nobel Peace Prize winners were there. Ronald Reagan was there, Mikhail Gorbachev, Margaret Thatcher. It was like a post-Cold War kind of Hall of Fame powwow to like talk about now the Cold War is over. What are the new aspirations for the world community? And those conversations actually eventually turned into the Millennial Development Goals, which are now the Sustainable Development Goals, for people who are familiar with those, which is 17, which is kind of like the world's to-do list.
So you were there at the beginning of that. Wow.
Not the only. I mean, it was a whole lot of conversations that oscillated. But in this fuzzy period where the to-do list of the world prior to that was, more or less win the Cold War. And then there was this period where there was no kind of agreed objectives. And so, anyway, this was one of a lot of, attempts to convene that conversation. And I think quite late in the piece, they thought, well, if we're talking about the future, wouldn't it be nice to have some young people here? But they didn't have the time or the inclination or the budget to do this global search for worthy young leaders. So they did the smart thing you do, you partner. And they partnered with AFS, the student exchange organization I happen to be on, to select 32 young people from 28 countries who were already conveniently located in America.
Oh, brilliant.
And so I was somehow and I just found myself at this event in San Francisco, in amongst all these incredible people, meeting multiple, world leaders and Nobel Prize winners, and so it was just this kind of mind-blowingly kind of empowering experience of like, oh my God, I have a responsibility, young people need to have a voice, and I've been given this opportunity to speak on behalf of them. And that was great. But it was actually like in thinking about that afterwards that really set me on my course. Because as I thought about that kind of in the weeks afterwards, I reflected on how much it had meant to me, but how random it was that I was there at all. Like how many like
what's the chances?
Coincidental
people
exactly
across the planet.
And I realized that this is what youth empowerment usually looks like. It's usually like tokenistic, haphazard, and deeply biased towards wealth. Because I realized that all 32 of us were there. While we had surface diversity, we were boys and girls, black and white, and first world and third world. Every single one of us had parents who could afford to send us to America for a year on student exchange. And so literally what I've been trying to do ever since is think about how could I give everyone that experience? That experience that I had of being told that my voice mattered, that my story mattered, and that I had a role to play in creating a better future. How could everyone have that experience? And I still haven't figured that out, but that's what I've been trying to do ever since.
The problem you're trying to solve. That's a brilliant story. I didn't realize the type of detail you'd go into when I asked the question. So thanks for sharing that and just a bit of background there. That was really good. Yeah, no, I think that's been really good to frame where you've come from and how it sort of came about. And it's amazing how sometimes just these circumstances happen in our lives and it can impact the way we move forward and the things that we do. And yes, exactly right. So
I often think about that unknown person who dropped that brochure and who changed my life. Who doesn't even realize how much they changed my life.
And that could have been them if
they
put in their
throwing
pocket.
away a piece of paper.
Totally.
And it just set you on the path for the rest of your life.
If they hadn't been deeply irresponsible about littering, everything would have been different.
Brilliant, Tom. So obviously there's a bit of depth of passion in that in terms of what you're up to. So tell us a bit about the journey. You mentioned you've started multiple non-for-profits. Tell us a bit about the journey of how that's been and how that's played out.
I mean, it's been hard work, to be honest. I mean, the most significant of those, I founded a kind of high school student organization as soon as I got back from the US, and we ended up with like members in 50 high schools. We're holding events in Parliament House and publishing, I guess, what you'd call a zine that we distributed around. I was actually leveraging the borderline infinite photocopying allowance that our members of Parliament had. And I had both a Labour and a Liberal member of Parliament allowing me to come to their office and run off thousands of copies of they're like young people who care about politics. And then a university student organization, and then an organization called Vibewire, and that's I founded when I was, I guess 21, still at university, and it just turned 20. Just to date myself, very precisely. I was there for the first 8 years. And the reason I set up was because I got really passionate about technology and the power of the internet. And I realized what I really wanted to do was, I guess, at a fundamental level, create spaces where people can engage in conversation, can share their stories and perspectives, and hopefully come up with new ideas and ways to collaborate together to create a better future. And up until that point, I was doing that almost entirely through real-world events at universities. So we'd have all different types of events, film screenings, and bring politicians to campus and poets to campus and cool speakers and debates and, just stuff to get people thinking. But I realized at a certain point, but then I got really, then it was the year 2000 and the internet was so hot back then. And, I got really drawn in from a kind of, I guess, more a sociology point of view, I guess. I'm not a developer. I was doing a political science and a philosophy degree, just to give context. So my interest is like how people interact with ideas and how you inspire people to create change. But I got deeply fascinated by the internet as, for the first time in human history, a platform that was that had both mass reach and low cost. That previously, and I realized that, oh my goodness, this is where these conversations need to take place, not in a particular room, on the Kensington campus of the University of New South Wales, whatever. But if I care about bringing diverse communities together and letting people meet each other across different life experiences and hear each other, then suddenly there was this magical, facility that could allow us to do that without huge amounts of money. Didn't need a printing press, didn't need a TV license or any of that. And so despite having none of the necessary skills to make that vision come true, I set about trying to launch a youth culture, what was called back then Portal.
Okay.
It's been a while since I think you've probably heard
Portal,
about
that
portals,
word back in the day. But yeah.
It was all about portals in 2000,
It was,
2001, and we wanted to launch a youth culture portal that would be a space for young people. And so it took like almost, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years to kind of find a couple of people who knew what they were doing and talk them into doing what I wanted them to do and to work through that. And we actually did a range of things back then that were actually really innovative. Didn't, in that classic way, didn't feel major at the time. But looking back on it now, you realize quite significant. So, for instance, I'm not saying everyone else was inspired by us. We did, but this was kind of an idea whose time had come. But one of the things we did was put comments under every article. No one did that back then. You had forums. So the articles were for the smart people who knew what they were talking about, and then you got to read those. And then if you want to talk about it, here's a specific ghetto for you to talk about it that is separate, because these are different groups. There's the writers. And we're like, no, those are all the same group, and an article is just to start a conversation. And so where should that conversation take place? Right there on the article. And so we played around, we did like virtual summits, all the rage right now. We did we didn't know the phrase, but what you might call a virtual summit in 2002, which we called the E-Festival of Ideas, which was basically all in, asynchronous forums, but bringing special guests to do, I guess, kind of the equivalent of Ask Me Anythings, kind of and some of that. So we were just playing around, and the organization continues to exist today to support young people to make a difference.
Brilliant.
But what kind of happened through that time was, A, we were getting heavily involved in using technology. B, we were, I guess, figuring out ways to fund that and discovering that didn't always involve, that increasingly didn't involve grants because they were really hard to get, and we weren't tax deductible, which ruled us out from a lot of, we were a not-for-profit, but not
it
tax
does.
deductible.
Yeah, it makes sense, yeah. R&D tax concessions and all that stuff really doesn't exist, does it? Yeah.
Didn't exist then, doesn't exist for not-for-profits. And so we started looking around, like, who else would fund this stuff? And over time, we figured out that corporates would sometimes sponsor activities that engage young people, that big NGOs or even government would pay you to help engage young people, and that it was possible for young people to pay themselves for certain opportunities and privileges. And so we essentially evolved into a social enterprise, but I'd never heard the phrase. I didn't really know what that was. I just knew that I had to find money, and that I was pretty open-minded about where that would come from. And so if that involved writing a pitch or a proposal rather than writing a grant application, I was up for that. And by the time, by the end of 8 years, we were about 2/3 earned revenue.
Okay.
Based, so it's still a third grants, but and so one of the things we did was open the first co-working space in Australia, and obviously on a paid on a fee model. With
sounds like you've done a lot of firsts in your world, Tom. So
tried a lot of experimenting.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it looks. I feel like it's one of the things I've really learned. I don't think I am actually. I don't think I'm deeply innovative in this. I'm not an inventor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm an early adapter. And so I'm constantly scanning what's around me and then wondering how that might be relevant for the things I care about. So I did open the first co-working space in Australia, but not because I thought of, I didn't invent the model of a co-working space. I read about this amazing space in King's Cross, which was the first hub. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hub network. There's Hub Australia.
Yeah, I'm familiar
has
with Hub,
6 or 7 spaces, but there's 300 of them around the world now. It's a franchise model. But back then there was one of them in King's Cross in London. And so I wrote to them, was like, this sounds amazing. And they just shared everything with me. It's before their franchise model, before they were charging to teach you how to open a co-working space. And they just gave me their model, their bloody architect's plans, their financial. And I just kind of adapted that and said, what I want is to support young entrepreneurs 16 to 30, by which I mean not just kids, but young adults, to be able to focus on making things happen, being entrepreneurial in the pursuit of social change. And I think kind of being in a space together and working on that together could be really helpful. And it's the same with crowdfunding. When I ended up there, I was inspired by Kickstarter, who I thought was solving an important problem for creative entrepreneurs. And I thought, that's the same problem that needs to be solved for social entrepreneurs. How to get around the gatekeepers, how to not rely on the grant givers, because they're inherently conservative and risk averse. And if you want to do stuff that's kind of risky and innovative and fun and interesting, you're probably not going to get grants on day one. You might need to instead build a community of 100 true fans or 1,000 supporters, and through their aggregate contributions, you can make something amazing happen. Just like Kickstarter allowed artists to develop those direct relationships with Kickstarter and MySpace and a whole range of social technologies. Kickstarter added the funding piece though, that now you could rally together. If 1,000 people were willing to pay for your album and would pay for it before it existed, you could fund the recording of the album without needing a record label.
No, brilliant, Tom. Sounds like you dig around in all different areas and look to how to serve your social enterprise. And it's pretty cool the way you've structured some things along the journey and how that's evolved into different business models and just take. And like you said, you didn't have to invent them. You've taken them from other areas. And I think people are always looking for that big idea, that fresh idea that they can come out of their own mind. But sometimes, yeah, we can take a concept that's in one market, another country, and then bring it into a different space and create something new
Yeah,
and
and then
innovative.
tweak as needed.
Yeah,
That's right.
correct.
You know,
Yeah,
and I
and
think
you've done
that's
it
what
all with the lens of adding value.
yeah,
So how do
that's
I add
right.
value? How do I put these things together to then provide
Yeah,
better value to whoever I need to serve?
exactly. How do I make
Yeah.
this relevant to my community or the community I want to serve?
Yeah, no, brilliant. So, start some good. Let's dig in a little bit about that. That is the most technical of the products that you work around and business models that you work around. But clearly, it's supporting your passion and what you're all about in terms of serving the community at a higher level and bringing ideas that can better serve communities. So, when you went about that process, how did you start the process? Obviously, you saw a Kickstarter. I want to replicate this and shift the model a little bit. What did you do to just start that journey from a non-technical person jumping into something that needed a bit of a technical background?
Yeah, I guess I'd had quite a bit of experience, I guess, with being a non-technical founder and trying to find technical collaborators. I mean, you know, right from the start with Vibewire, we were, you know, like web focused
Yes.
and doing stuff there. And so I wasn't daunted by that per se, but certainly it was an experience in how challenging things can be when outsourcing without the experience to even kind of vet what you're getting back to some extent. So I guess the background with Starts with Good is I moved to the US and was first in Washington DC doing digital communications for a global organization called Ashoka,
Okay.
who actually invented the phrase social entrepreneurship
Oh, brilliant.
about 45 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, obviously they didn't invent the idea of being entrepreneurial in the pursuit of social change. They described something they saw, but there wasn't kind of a neat phrase to describe that kind of combination of elements that is entrepreneurial, but not in the pursuit of private returns, but in the pursuit of, you know, broader social outcomes. And then I moved to San Francisco to work for a kind of innovation for good lab in Silicon Valley called Hope Lab, which is cool. And while I was there, though, a couple of things happened. One, I felt like I observed for the first time in my life a truly pro-innovation ecosystem. I feel like in the social sector, you know, I kind of float, I guess, on the edges. I'm kind of in the kind of intersection point between like startups and philanthropy a little bit, like social good. And it's really interesting culturally, the attitudes towards risk in the two. Like people talk a good game about innovation when it comes to social good. Everyone knows you need innovation. Everyone knows the world is changing fast. And so you can't just rely on things that were proven to work yesterday. But no one wants to pay for it because paying for innovation means paying for failure. Because the only way you get innovation is by trying stuff that may or may not work.
Yeah, there is risk.
And along the way,
right?
yeah, exactly, there's risk. And inevitably, you know, there's not even the risk of risk. There's the guarantee of risk, the guarantee of failure. But in the social sector, everyone has this feeling like there's no money to waste, and that paying for failures is wastage. And therefore, the focus, particularly for social good, is prove to me that it already works. You know, show me your impact metrics. And if I give you $1, for every $1 I give you, what's the social outcome? Like people try to reduce it down to these like very specific kind of financial, which makes sense at a certain scale, but it's obviously impossible for someone with a new idea or a genuinely innovative idea.
Yeah.
And so what I realized spending time in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, I mean, your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with kind of the general startup funding. But there's kind of two, this is very broad brushstrokes, but angel investors and VCs, venture capitalists. And what I realized as angel investors normally investing their own money, making, you know, fairly speculative bets, accepting that a lot of those won't work out, but excited to be part of the journey and fueled by optimism and upside. VCs a bit more skeptical, like show me the data. Like VCs are investing someone else's money, which is a key dynamic. They're going to have to turn around and justify their decisions to their LPs, and therefore their decisions have to be sensible. They have to be able to point to the data that this is why we decided this, because here's the here's the data, here's the proof. There's no guarantee, but there's good reasons to believe this will work out. And what I realized is that the kind of social funding writ large, whoever's doing it, you know, corporate foundations, high net worth individuals, government, is like a world of all VCs with no angels. No one, very few people are willing to. There's no foundations out there who go, people say what they're pro-innovation, but no one out there is like, we made 100 grants last year and 90 of them failed, but gee, did we discover some amazing stuff? Like no one would be willing to do that, which is of course what an angel investor has to do. And so that's where I saw that there was an opportunity or a need where something like, we need to fill that angel investor type role. Someone has to pay to try things so that you can collect data and then take it to the people who need data before they can make a decision. And I thought, well, crowdfunding. So I looked around and said, who else is kind of funding experiments? And I thought, well, kind of Kickstarter seems very different, but it's kind of funding creative experiments. Like
It's not much different there at all.
Yeah, that's-
in reality.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's
publishing authors who may or may not be
Yes.
great writers. A book publisher not yet ready to take a punt on them, but again, if they could find a couple hundred people who are like, yeah, let's give it a go. And of course, the risk in backing something at that early stage is so much less if you give less.
Yeah, of course.
You know, like
if it's
giving
$100 compared to 50,000, it's a very different
Exactly.
conversation, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, essentially the role. So I was thinking about all this stuff already in San Francisco, and then I got a phone call from an Ashoka colleague, Alex Burdak, who pitched me the idea basically that we should set up a social change crowdfunding platform. And initially I was like, no way, Alex. I've literally been in San Francisco like 5 weeks. I think I was still sleeping on an air mattress. Like I hadn't set up my house properly. I just started a new job, which was pretty hectic already. I was just like not at all in the right
headspace,
place
right?
or headspace at all.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I can't do that, Alex, but I'm happy to give advice, happy to be on your site. It's a great idea. You should do it. And like 2 weeks later, I realized it was all I was thinking about.
Okay, so it consumed you.
Yeah, which turned out to be a danger sign for my new job as well. Probably a sign that wasn't going to be long for me. But instantly it was just running through my head. It just resonated with so much of the stuff that I'd done before, like trying to raise money myself for new ideas, and didn't have. I wished I'd had crowdfunding when I was doing Vibewire. It would have been really helpful for us.
Yeah, it would have made a big difference back there. If you think about it, right?
It's exactly the kind of tool we would have used. And so after a couple of weeks, I'm like, all right, I'm in. And then we spent a couple of weeks trying to find the product and what does it look like to tweak that on behalf of, and debating slightly different crowdfunding models and so on. And then we had to build it. And we didn't have, neither of us were technical. And so we relied on, Alex had a close friend from university who, was an engineer and who was now working for, I think, like OkCupid or something like that, some big dating site. Nice. But was a professional in a full-on technical startup environment, and he was willing to kind of guide us and architect it, and then we outsourced to a team in, I think, India.
Yeah, okay.
To build the first version. And so a couple of I guess warning or kind of things that were not great about that process for other people repeating it. With the guy, Alex's friend, was kind of like helping him out, not truly invested in what we were doing, didn't share our passion, was a close friend and was doing his best to help. We gave him some equity, but he didn't really have that long-term investment. But it also meant we were a bit stuck. And I experienced this a lot actually at Vibewire, when you're reliant on, he was essentially a volunteer. He didn't have a true mindset of like, oh man, if I side hustle this for 6 months, I'll be able to quit OkCupid and go full time and start to do.
He wasn't thinking that way. Just thinking,
he was just like,
lean on
Alex,
me for a bit of help. Yeah,
my mate Alex is really passionate about this thing and has asked me to help, and I'll help out.
Yeah, okay.
And I'd experienced this a lot at Vibewire, where I was reliant on volunteers, and a part of. Sorry guys, I don't know how much that's coming through. There seems to be some police chase out the window.
Yeah, maybe pause for a second.
That sounds like a bunch of vehicles.
Yeah, it's coming right through, but that's okay.
I guess that's what literally those sirens are designed for.
Correct, yeah. Make sure everyone hears them.
Yeah.
That's when you start, we'll just backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
So
where was I?
saying he wasn't invested, just volunteering.
So his mindset was more a helping out, more of a volunteer mindset than a co-founder mindset, like trying to think of it as, maybe a side hustle now, but a focus later. And that reminded me a bit of, I guess, all the volunteers I'd worked with at Vibewire, where we were constantly reliant on person A who knew how to do X, and therefore we had to do X. And so, in the 8 years I was at Vibewire, we completely rebuilt our website 3 times because our kind of volunteer lead techie changed and wanted to put it on a new platform. So we went from Drupal to Mambo to I forget what, because sometimes we'd find ourselves and there'd be no one in our crew who could really like build on our website, and someone would be like, well, I'm willing to fill that job, but I wouldn't, but I want to build it on Mambo. We're like, well, all right, do that. And so that was kind of a nightmare at Vibewire that we had to keep rebuilding. So this was a similar sort of scenario whereby we ended up on completely the wrong language. It was built on C++, and it's not the kind of thing that you build a like responsive, lean web app like we're doing. It's the kind of thing you'd build like a super intense database-driven website, like say OkCupid, in something that's crunching vast data sets to try and make matches amongst tens of millions of people.
It's a very different thing, right?
That apparently, I mean, I don't know, but apparently that's the logical language to build it. And not at all the way, but and yet it's what we were building because it's just what he knew how to do. And then we got this outsourced team. And the other thing I found that was really challenging about that outsourced model without a truly invested technical lead in-house was we couldn't really assess how good it was. It looked fine and it worked fine when we I kind of the thing I always think about maybe as an analogy is it's a little bit like looking at secondhand cars. If you're not a car person, as I'm not, always a bit stressful, right? You're like it works fine as we go around the block, but how good is it really? Can't look at the engine. And so this was fine. This was fine so long as we were driving around the suburbs at 40 k's an hour. Essentially our website. But as soon as we got it out on the freeway, as soon as like any amount of traffic hit it, it was just so inefficiently built that it slowed down to almost nothing the moment we tried to get any scale.
I think it's a great analogy that you shared there around buying a second-hand car. I think might you steal that from you. I think it's
you can have that.
Yeah, because people get that. It's like and everyone's experienced that. So
and you get terrified. I bought a second-hand car last year, and we required it had to have perfect service history. Like there were some nice cars out there that seemed a good price, but any sort of we just couldn't take the risk. We're not car people. We can't look at the engine
and it's just software. It's like a car exactly. So it's very complicated. Lots of things under the hood. You don't even people who coded. There could be 3 different people, and they're all isolated from each other, potentially not knowing what the other person was thinking at that point in time.
That's exactly
and then, because you have a volunteer technical advisor who's not actually reviewing and taking charge of that, it's up in the air really.
Totally, like good enough was good enough for him. Like as long as it just kind of worked.
Sort of worked and looked like it should.
There you go. You got what you wanted. It works. It doesn't really work. We can't build a business. We can't scale. We realized in order to scale, and that's why eventually we raised money. I say that because we got stuck in this kind of technical debt, whereby the website literally wouldn't let us scale effectively. But without that scale, we couldn't generate the revenue that would enable us to rebuild.
And
the only way to resolve that was to
exactly.
And then we just had to, and we were, I'm very grateful for the people who backed us at the time and did invest in us that we could throw it away and completely rebuild. And fortunately, by this point, with a technical co-founder and CTO, Renata Van Diest, who's still with me now. Alex burnt out after 3 years. Renata joined the team. We're actually a much better, more natural co-founder pairing with me with the more industry expertise around fundraising and social entrepreneurship, and Renata being a senior engineer at Microsoft and had been with a couple of startups. So she brought that, and so we still outsource. We're still a one-person tech team, but outsourcing when you have the in-house knowledge to even obviously to brief better and to test what they're doing and to look under the hood and say, does this work, made a huge difference for that. And we're still on that platform now. I mean, obviously we've been iterating it ever since, but it's still the same basic platform that we rebuilt 6 years ago now.
Okay. Yes. So having that knowledge in-house, being able to speak the same language.
And so whether that's in-house or having a trusted partner, I think, not just having that arm's length relationship with the cheapest service provider, whatever. I definitely think you need someone you can really. We've had some good outsourcing relationships since then as well, with more often with local people. So you can build obviously the world's very interconnected now, so that's not a must necessarily, but I think it can really help. Obviously, if you build a proper relationship with people who really can get on the same page, and whether that person's inside or a really trusted partner, not just where you don't just feel like a client, you've got a real partner in
they have to want to help you and help you get where you want to go. It's like bringing the mechanic to the car yard with you.
Having that that's same exactly thing. Right. Like having that relationship with the mechanic, like it makes such a big difference when like mechanic, if you like picking a mechanic scary again because you can't really test their work, but once you find a mechanic that you trust, you want to hold on to that person because that's such a load off your mind for the rest of your life.
I think one of the key words you mentioned there was partner, and you're on a journey because you're on an unknown journey too. You've got an idea, you're starting out at a point where you think that this may be the way we take this, and I'm sure that your model's evolved over time and your thinking's evolved over time, and you need someone that's going to be there with you to help you make those pivotal decisions along the journey too, from one business perspective to technical perspective, because they can impact each other quite significantly. Have you found the models evolved over time, or has it pretty much been set from where you've started out from?
No, it has evolved quite a bit actually. I mean, in the sense that it's evolved, but like we're still doing exactly what we originally did, but we're just doing some additional stuff on top of that. And I guess what made us unique when we launched was our focus, that kind of as a curatorial focus, we only take social good or social environmentally positive projects, but our impact focus was also that we want to help people succeed who wouldn't succeed without us. So if we're just providing another place where people who would have succeeded on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or Puzzle, but they just so happen to be succeeding with us, like obviously that's cool, we're capturing, that's good for us, but it's not really changing anything out there in the world. That person you would have probably just succeeded somewhere else. And so I guess part of my background is in, I guess, empowering people from diverse backgrounds, and one of the things I really learned around that is that you can't just hand people a tool. You got to teach them how to use that tool confidently and successfully as well. So, if you're empowering young people to share their stories through video, you can't just rock up and hand the video cameras and then leave.
It doesn't work, does it?
No, they're going to be like, what do I do with this?
Build it and they'll come scenario.
Exactly.
It never
but
works
that's basically
that way.
how most crowdfunding platforms are. They've got some good materials, but you kind of got to go through those materials yourself and have enough, I guess, context or experience to even understand what they're talking about. And so part of our focus was we really wanted to be the most helpful platform. We really wanted to support people and give people real feedback so that they could kind of, people who have a good idea but don't know how to tell it, we want to help them tell it. Not just here are the tools, but here's a bit of coaching and advice on how to actually shape that story, who that story's for, the outreach campaign. Actually putting up the crowdfunding campaign is the easiest and least important part of the process. It's obviously the actual outreach campaign around that, which requires some sophistication around crafting your pitch, identifying your target market, your persona, the persona you're out.
So there's a whole, I'm imagining right here, right now, is you started at a tool, but a realization was to help people, you really need to help them craft their idea, consult their model, how they might pitch this out. And that's how the models really evolved, not specifically with the tool, but more the business model and how you operate.
Yeah, what we wrap around that tool. So I realized that this is my own naivety with business. I'd only ever, been in not-for-profits. I'd done one previous business, but it was kind of, it was a simple business. I was running musical events, and we were donating profits to youth causes. So it was a social enterprise, but it was that simple form of social enterprise, right? Run a business like normal, donate profits.
Yes.
That's kind of like one version of social enterprise. But the harder, more sophisticated version of social enterprise is design a business with impact at its heart. And what I hadn't realized was some sort of the conflict between our impact model and our business model. That the platform business model, any type of platform, really requires high volume, low touch. And the ultimate aspiration of any platform model is to get to the point where the incremental cost of a new whatever is zero. So it costs Airbnb nothing for another house listing to arrive. It costs Indiegogo nothing for another crowdfunding campaign to launch. And so at that point, any success rate, it can be highly profitable if you just operationalize acquiring and launching campaigns to a point where you barely touch them. That's just not how we built our model, because we wanted to be high touch. We want to provide every campaign draft on our site gets paired with a crowdfunding coach on our team who reaches out and be like, got any questions? How can I help? And here's some specific feedback for you about your campaign. Here are some things that you can make better. The problem is that doesn't pay for itself on the crowdfunding model.
Imagine not. It's got the clip, right?
Yeah.
So,
exactly. And it never did, but it took me a little while to realize it. And I guess a couple of years in, we realized we were stuck in this annoying spot where it felt like we were providing too much support from a financial point of view, but too little support from an impact point of view.
Okay.
That a little bit of feedback and a couple of check-ins is not really taking someone who's total, who's got a great idea but no life experience to prepare them for pitching, selling, online community building, to get them there. And so I guess we've been trying to figure that out ever since. One of the ways in which we've done that is through partnerships and programs that are funded by essentially moving from, it's kind of all B2B because people tend to be launching companies and projects. But if we call that B2C because it's an individual purchase, it's an individual founder or entrepreneur, we move from that to more B2B where an institution or a large company will fund us to run programs that support those emerging startups. So last year, for instance, we ran 2 corporate-funded accelerators, one for Optus and one for Austral Fisheries, that supported emerging social enterprises in their areas. We also run our own social enterprise design program called Good Hustle, which is a 10-week course. And it kind of reverse engineers everything. Because one of the things we realized, of course, when it comes to crowdfunding is there's only so much you can do when you're a week out from launch. We do people come to us, we do our best to help them think through their bit. But if it's just badly designed in the first place, the actual idea is not very strong, not very clear, the actual impact model doesn't make sense, there's only so much you can do when it comes to just improving the crowdfunding campaign. And so Good Hustle is us kind of reverse engineering everything that we've seen work and not work over 10 years of helping people launch. We think we have a very good, the most insight of almost anyone in the world is what is launch readiness? When are you actually ready to present your idea to people in a way that they will be ready to respond to? And whether that's pre-purchasing a product or backing a philanthropic initiative or signing up to some sort of cause campaign. It's what does it take to convince people to take that step? And so Good Hustle then is us kind of reverse engineering that into a formula. Here are 10 things you need to get right. in order to be launch ready in terms of your impact model and your business model and your definition of your target market and refining your pitch as well. And personal self-care is one of those 10, like being ready for the journey. That if you're launching something,
it is a journey, isn't it?
Be ready for that to be a long journey, and you better think carefully about how you are not going to burn out, because burnout is actually one of the great sources of failure for startups and businesses, and for cause campaigns, especially people who are very passionate, that can really burn out from kind of not balancing their passion with self-care and so on. And so that's a lot of what we do. In some ways, that I guess that focus on equipping people, building their capacity to use the tools that we've built, has become the majority of our business now. That's the considerable majority of our revenue. But actually, one of our challenges for this year is we want to rebalance that. We've just had a new guy join the team, who's kind of the third core member of our leadership group now as our general manager, Simon Keith. He's ex-Atlassian. So he's got some real experience with scaling.
Yes, I imagine he would have. Yes,
and we don't so much. I mean, we've kind of, we're proud of what we've done the last 10 years, but it certainly hasn't grown to anything like, my initial naive optimism. But I still want to. Yes. Ultimately, we want to create the greatest impact possible. And that means building, supporting more social entrepreneurs, launching more campaigns, helping them raise more money, and making more of an impact. And so we're really trying to rebalance now to kind of get back on a scaling trajectory with the platform, complemented by all these other kind of upgrades, by the additional coaching you can receive from us, by the additional we even go all the way through to co-design services, helping people really craft and shape their campaign, who are in a position to invest in that kind of specialty help to really refine and make their campaign most likely to succeed. But we want to rebalance, because I guess our vision for the company is not ultimately an at-scale fee-for-service agency.
It's a fun place to be, though. I think just drawing a bit of an understanding of where you're at. So you're obviously an ideas guy. You love working on new concepts, and maybe that's where the business is drawn to. And
it's true. Now I need someone with a bit of discipline to say, should we really do that new thing, or should we focus on our existing thing?
I think that's all. You've learnt a lot, and that experience it's about how do you scale it now. And I think you're in a really interesting position, being able to know what the 10 things are to be able to help, because you can put a platform out there, like you said, but a platform's a tool like anything. If you don't know how to use a tool,
crowdfunding has woeful success rate. Most people don't know, and this is, I guess, one of our challenges is that I think people don't realize how little they know about crowdfunding a lot of the time.
Yes.
From the outside, people think it's just about having a snazzy video and a bit of copy, when in fact it's obviously a really focused, effective outreach, marketing and sales campaign. And so a lot of people, I think, have very wishful thinking, that crowdfunding is just, if you have a good idea and you list it on a crowdfunding platform, that people will find it and people will fund it. I'm like, no.
Doesn't work that way. Nothing's ever as easy as it sounds.
People only ever hear the success stories about the quickest funded and the ones that break their records. No one ever hears about the failures.
No, that's it. I mean, did you know, people don't even realize, that crowdfunding truly is the iceberg. With the success stories are that, Indiegogo, only 11% of projects reach their goals.
Yeah,
but that 11% of the ones, are some big eye-catching campaigns. People are like, wow, it's like you can raise a lot of money there. But in fact, 90% of everyone who lists a project on Indiegogo is failing to reach their goals. So this is one of the things where where you really do see it's hard to make our approach. It's been hard for us to make it work from a business point of view, but it certainly works from an outcomes point of view. Our
What's the difference there?
Is about 53% of projects reaching their goals.
It's a very different number, isn't it?
Yeah. Kickstarter's 31%, just to give a bit of a spectrum.
You're not just throwing an idea on the platform.
We're basically at the top.
Yes.
Yeah, because part of that is, of course, that we are a curated platform, so some of that is like terrible campaigns that never launched, that wouldn't have succeeded, that other platforms
they're already not there.
that just will let go live. And hopefully, some of it is people who really do, refine their ideas and get a sense of direction and focus and strategy through their interactions with us, and are therefore able to get it out there more effectively and ultimately, rally the community they need.
Brilliant, Tom. Obviously, you're all about passion and impact. So tell us a couple of stories of some of your I'd imagine close to heart sort of success stories and what's been launched through the platform and that you've helped get to success.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, there's been some really great launches and pilots and saving some stuff, preventing things shutting down. Lots of different contexts, but of course, starting things is a particular passion and focus of ours. So, I mean, a great technology, one that comes to my mind that I think could be of interest to you guys, it's not software, but it is actually software, sorry. It's kind of software and hardware. An amazing Australian startup called Ability Made.
Okay.
And they create child orthotics, so like particularly specializing in feet and ankles for kids who don't, through birth defects or horrific accidents, have lost their feet and ankles. It's a genuine order of magnitude step forward in the technology. It used to take, it was all done with plaster casting often, so often very traumatic for kids, didn't like it. Then it would take up to 5 or 6 weeks to produce and cost up to $10,000. And of course, kids grow fast. So I don't know if you guys have kids and buy, it's a little bit like,
imagine very quick.
So you know what a pain it is buying shoes for kids. Imagine having to replace their foot.
Wow.
As they were growing. So really expensive and inaccessible. What they've done is their actual breakthrough tech is software. Actually, it's a 3D scanning tech. They can literally just scan the leg, and then it will create a CAD model and print it and use 3D printing. They can make them in a day now for like $400.
Yeah, wow, that's a massive innovation.
So just an incredible step forward, not just like a little bit better. It's a classic like 10 times better.
Yes.
And you can particularly think about that's great in Australia, but the real impact I think will be overseas. Like when you think about the amount of amputations in a place like Cambodia, where they can't afford any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So really proud of that. That was they funded their first clinical trials, or their first like in-practice trials with that, which is again a key moment to build that. One of the things we kind of mentioned, one of the things we pitch with crowdfunding is that it's not just an alternative form of source of capital. It's a source of validation that then helps you get the capital from those VC type funders who just need evidence. It can help you collect that evidence. Even the act of successfully crowdfunding something is data, is evidence. It's like, see, people want this. I can prove that people want it. They've put their own money in. Now you should invest as well. So they've gone on to raise several $1 million in impact investing, and they're scaling now. What are some other great examples? There's a cool, I'm focusing more on cool tech and stuff. There's a cool technology rollout out of or commercialization out of UTS called Psychonetic, and it's mind control wheelchairs.
Mind control wheelchairs, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Mind blowing. How great is that?
Yeah.
And it has to be AI. Apparently, it's one of the interesting things was you can't just read someone's mind because you have to then have an AI layer that interprets it. Because otherwise, the person thinks to themselves, "Let's avoid that wall," when the wheelchair runs into the wall.
Yeah,
because it picks up the brain going, "Wall," you say.
Wall, yes.
So you gotta, So anyway, that's fascinating. That was a PhD from UTS, and he raised about $100,000.
Yes.
To put that into production. So that was kickers. But we've also had lots of food and fashion, and one of my favorites is Sacred Era, which is an indigenous streetwear label, launched with us a couple of years ago, and they make really cool stuff. I'm a fan and a customer. Good beer, which I launched Great Barrier Beer with us. A good brewing co. Great Barrier Beer was the specific beer, and it's a social enterprise beer that gives profits to the Great Barrier Reef.
Okay. Oh, that's a beautiful place. It needs definitely some help with what's going on in the ecosystem. Yeah.
And if we can do that, while also drinking beer, that's a bit of a win-win.
Oh, that's a win for everybody, isn't it? I really love the diversity that's on the platform. There's beer, there's fashion, there's wheelchairs that are controlled by AI. It's pretty cool stuff in terms of what you're helping and evolving out through the platform. So I can understand the excitement of getting involved.
And it's less technology stuff as well. That's like some of the cutting edge innovation. But there's also like there's been a bunch of community gardens. There's been after school, tutoring programs for kids who are falling through cracks. It's just the whole gamut of anything you can think of. Really, we're very passionate about social enterprise, but we're actually like model agnostic. It could be a profit for purpose company. It could be a traditional not for profit. It could just be you and a bunch of friends trying to make something happen. So long as the actual project itself is making a positive impact in the world, we would love to host it. We don't care kind of. We're not, we're less focused on what form do you choose to pursue that impact through. We think that's kind of up to you and up to your potential supporters. Someone else may or may not give you money because they don't like, the fact that you're a social enterprise rather than a charity or whatever. But that's their decision, not ours. We want all of that to, be able to go forward.
To help get as much impact as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my real beliefs, I thought, so like who was excluded from traditional fundraising infrastructure? There obviously were. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there's been online fundraising infrastructure for a while. It's ever evolving, ever improving. But 10 years ago, it wasn't so much that the infrastructure didn't exist, but who had access to it. It was almost all built for only tax-deductible charities, only for the traditional, fundraising entities. And there was this assumption, I think, that people would only give money if they got a tax deduction. And I never thought that was true, and I feel like we've really proven that isn't true. That people at that lower level, sure, if you're giving $1 million, you'd really love a tax receipt because that gives you, $500,000 back. But if you're giving $50, no one cares.
It's not a big dollar spend, right?
Or $100, exactly. People do it for positive reasons. They do it because they're inspired, because they feel hopeful, because they're moved, because they want to be part of something. They don't do it because they're going to get $32 back from the government in 15 months.
Yeah.
You know, like they're literally just not even thinking about that at all. And so what we realized, or our hypothesis that we hope we've proven, is that it's, you know, the not-for-profit sector had become kind of obsessed by what they weren't, that they were not-for-profit, whereas we need to be focusing on what we are, that we're making a difference. And then, and if you're making a difference, then the form factor is less important to people. They just want to be inspired. They want to see good work happen. They want to be part of making things better.
Yeah, something greater than themselves.
Exactly. And sometimes that will be through giving a donation. Sometimes that will be through choosing to buy a particular brand of beer. You know, that's the social enterprise. That's the power of the social enterprise model, which I love, is that you can kind of do the right thing while also, you know, doing what you want to do, you know, wearing shirts you like and drinking beer, and that all those things can still be positive social acts if we make the right decisions, you know, make the right conscious decisions about who we're supporting. But the other people who are excluded beyond kind of social enterprises was just unincorporated groups. You know, that if you guys wanted to, like, if you guys were neighbors and you wanted to organize a park cleanup in your local park, and for that you needed like $500 because you wanted to hire a skip and get some gloves and bags and so on, you shouldn't need to set up Park Cleanup Inc. just to kind of
get that done. Makes the barrier completely
just to
impossible.
Access some modern tools to pass the hat around and raise the funds you need to do something good in your local community.
I love the little, how little the change could be and how big it can be, and I think it's quite an interesting space that you're in, and I get the impact's pretty huge, and I see it coming through the screen as you're staring at me, and I'm really enjoying your passion in the project and how you've put this together and where it might go to. What's the vision? Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? Obviously, you brought on someone for scale from Atlassian. What does that mean for you, and where do you want to be?
Yeah, if we don't make it, it's all Simon's fault, not mine. We want to be, you know, I mean, we want to, you know, big picture, we want to, you know, fuel a movement of change makers to create a better future. Ultimately, through that movement, we hope to increase the pace of innovation for social change. We think there's a real urgent need for us to simply build a better muscle when it comes to social innovation, and that requires, you know, a innovation ecosystem.
Yes.
One of the things I'm having to learn is that we can't necessarily do all the things in that ecosystem.
It'd be nice if you could, but sometimes we're a piece in the puzzle, right?
Exactly. Yes. And so we want to improve and scale our piece, and our hope is that over the next 5 years we can help launch 10,000 social impact initiatives that change over 1 million lives.
It's a great goal.
Yeah, that awesome goal, Tom.
I was going to say, do you have a question?
No, go for it.
I was going to say, so if people wanted to start some good, where can they find out about you?
Well, startsomegood.com is a great place to start, Anthony. Thank you for asking. If they're interested in our Good Hustle program specifically, because they're at that more ideation or trying to actually kind of, you know, lock down their ideas into a coherent plan and strategy, then should check out goodhustle.online as well.
Cool. And we'll put those links out in the show notes, and hopefully everyone can reach out to you.
Brilliant. Yeah, please do. And everyone should feel free. I am very welcoming of connections on LinkedIn from anyone who's on that social entrepreneurial journey. Would love to stay in touch. You know, if there's anything you can learn from me, and I'm sure there's things I can learn from you as well, because we're all learning all the time.
Oh, we are, and I think that's there's plenty of learning going through your journey right now and sharing that out. So thanks for coming on, sharing your journey thus far and the impact you're making, and good luck with it all, because it's all for a good cause. So I really appreciate your direction you've taken. So congrats on it all.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Yeah, I really appreciate this. You know, you sharing the platform that you've created and put so much work into building this podcast and giving me that opportunity to share my story. It's a great privilege. Thank you.